For Rebel Yell, there was a big difference in 1985. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 104 is a 200 milliliter bottle of Rebel Yell bourbon. It's one of a few medium-sized bottles in Grandma's otherwise tiny bottle collection. I unboxed 5 this size in reveal number 20. 2 of them are bigger versions of bottles I've already talked about, Jim Beam and Jack Daniels. I'm going to hold off on talking about those new bottles for a little while. I've found a few almost duplicates in the collection recently, so I'll do a rapid-fire catch-up episode about all of them in a few weeks. But this bottle of Rebel Yell is definitely worth talking about now. The Rebel Yell label was created in the 1930s by the then mayor of Louisville, Charles Farnsley. His uncle Alex Farnsley was the co-owner of the Stitzel-Weller Distillery. He bottled some whiskey under the Rebel Yell label for Charles, who mostly gave them away as gifts. In the 1960s, possibly to commemorate the centennial of the Civil War, Stitzel-Weller took over the brand themselves and started selling it more broadly. But not that broadly. Rebel Yell bourbon was the official bourbon of the South and only sold below the Mason-Dixon line. Advertising proclaimed that it was distinctively Southern, which you could tell from its gentle whisper of wheat. It was also handmade to suit Southern tastes and the original unreconstructed bourbon. A later ad described Rebel Yell as one of the joys of being a good old boy. So yeah, definitely some politics in this whiskey. The modern legacy of the Stitzel-Weller Distillery is not because of Stitzel or Weller, but another person entirely. I said that Alex Farnsley was the co-owner of Stitzel-Weller, and the person he co-owned it with was none other than Pappy Van Winkle. Today, that's one of the biggest names in cult bourbon, and Stitzel-Weller was where that family legacy started. The Van Winkles weren't distillers, but their distillery was known for making great bourbon. And as the ads mentioned, it was a wheated bourbon. Corn is the main grain used for bourbon, but distillers can add other grains for flavoring. Most use rye, but from the start of the Stitzel-Weller Distillery in 1849, they were using wheat. Today, bottle number 1, Maker's Mark, is the best-known wheated bourbon. Some sources claim Bill Samuels learned the tricks to making it from his friends at Stitzel-Weller. Rebel Yell was just one of their bourbons, with Weller and Old Fitzgerald also in the lineup. The Van Winkles sold the distillery in 1972. Production of the various brands seems to have continued unchanged for a while, but eventually small differences in things like proof and aging began to creep in. For Rebel Yell, there was a big difference in 1985. That's when the new owners, United Distillers, dropped the proof from 90 to 80 and decided to take the brand national. This despite those proud good old boy claims that sales would always be restricted to the South. Capitalism always wins. Or maybe we should blame Billy Idol, since that change happened just a year after he recorded his hit song Rebel Yell, which was inspired by drinking Rebel Yell bourbon with Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. In 1992, the Stitzel-Weller Distillery was closed, and production of Rebel Yell and the other Stitzel-Weller bourbons moved to a new distillery. Distilleries have their own ecosystem, and the interplay of conditions and equipment leaves its mark on the whiskey. Combine that with nostalgia, and to this day there's a lot of interest in and respect for those old Stitzel-Weller bottles, which would include mine. Based on the tax strip, my 90 proof bottle is from between 1983 and 1985, and exclusively for the Deep South is still prominently displayed on the label. There's a tiny bit of a state tax label for Tennessee as well. The pre-1972 bottles are most sought after, but reviews of later 1970s and 80s bottles indicate that this should be quite a treat for a bourbon fan. The brand is still sort of around today. United Distillers sold off Rebel Yell to Luxco in 1999, and in 2020 it was rebranded to just Rebel to put some distance between it and its Confederate heritage. While it's still a wheated bourbon, reviews of modern bottles indicate that the flavor profile is quite different now. I like bourbon, but I'm definitely not an expert, so I'll be looking for someone fun to open up this bottle with. If that's you or you have any ideas for who it should be, let me know. You can leave a comment below or at mytinybottles.com, or find me on social media. I'm at mytinybottles on Instagram and Facebook, and at TammyLC on Blue Sky. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Cheers!